I beseech my colleagues, I will read any book, any magazine, any speech you've given that you want me to read. Read this report and come back and tell me if you think Donald Trump did the right thing in converting the White House into a for-profit operation. No other president in American history has come anywhere close. And you ask why he's so determined to stay in office that he would unleash violence against his own vice president, the brother of your colleague, of our colleague. Why would he do that? It's because it was a money-making operation, and it was a great business grift for a guy who went bankrupt several times. And yet, out of some misguided partisan loyalty, you're going to stick with him. I don't even know why you stick with him. He was a Democrat longer than he was a Republican. He wanted to run for president on the Reform Party. You guys have been taken over by an absolute con man. And now you're acting like members of a religious cult who don't even remember how you got in the first place.
That was Jamie Raskin at his absolute best, and I'm proud to be joined right now by Jamie Raskin to talk about an issue that you, Congressman, are very clearly and rightfully so focused on as it relates to Donald Trump. This is episode 4 of what has instantly become a very successful series called Class with Jamie Raskin, where the congressman debunks right-wing constitutional fallacies and fever dreams. And today he's going to do exactly that as he discusses today's constitutional fallacy, this notion that the Emoluments Clause doesn't stop the president from taking foreign government payments if he declines his official salary and donates what he deems to be profits to the United States Treasury. Congressman, floor is yours.
We're delighted to be with you, Brian. And I've been out on the road campaigning. I've been to, a total of 20 states now. I just got back from New Jersey, where I was with my friend Mikey Sherrill and Billy Pascrell and Sue Altman, who's a great new candidate. And everywhere I went, everybody was talking to me about our constitutional law class. So I'm thrilled that people are engaging with it and people are telling me they're watching the whole thing. And so that's awesome. Welcome back, everybody, to episode 4. I'm going to repeat the fallacy that Brian just invoked. The way I'm framing it is that the Foreign Emoluments Clause does not stop the president from taking foreign government payments so long as he declines to accept his official salary and donates what he deems to be the profits of these foreign government emoluments to the United States Treasury. Let's see how well this common right-wing fallacy, promoted actively by Donald Trump and his sons and the Trump family and the Trump businesses, actually squares with the language and the proper interpretation of the Constitution. So, step back for a moment and let's just look at what the emoluments clauses are all about. Okay, there's 2 of them. There's the domestic emoluments clause, and then there's the foreign. And we'll be dealing primarily with the foreign, but keep in mind the domestic emoluments clause because it's very important. It's really about the president's salary. And the meaning of the domestic emoluments clause is the president gets a salary from the United States government, which is fixed by law, and which cannot be varied by Congress during the course of the president's term. And the president can get no other money from federal government agencies or departments or from a particular state. Let's just look at the specific terms of Article 2, Section 1, Clause 7 of the Constitution. It says, the president shall at stated times receive for his services a compensation, which shall neither be increased nor diminished during the period for which he shall have been elected, and he shall not receive within that period any other emolument, which just means a payment, a benefit, an advantage of any kind, from the United States or from any of the states. So, let's think about that in the context of the creation of the Constitution and the American Revolution. Our forebears rebelled against a king, a monarch. And in a monarchy, the finances of the king are merged with the finances of the state. In other words, if there's money that is in the royal treasury, that money is available both to the king as a person for whatever purposes he might want to use, and then also for the purposes of the nation. It's mixed together. L'État, c'est moi. The state is me. And that was the vision of the monarchy. Now, what we said, what our constitutional founders said in Article 2, Section 1, Clause 7, is that the president is confined to a salary, to one fixed payment in office. And you see how that's a radical break from monarchy. It means that one king and one queen and one royal family cannot plunder the people, but rather is a servant of the people and is paid for it fairly, because in a democracy, everybody should be paid for their work, including the president. But that doesn't mean that gives them a call on all of the resources of the state for their personal desires and whims. Okay, now let's flip over to the Foreign Emoluments Clause, because you'll see how they're complementary. The framers didn't want the president to be able to plunder the resources of the people. It belongs to the people. But then they worried about this problem. Well, if the president is limited to a salary, and all of history has told us that kings have unlimited avarice and greed, what will stop them from going to foreign governments and foreign kings and princes and collecting money from them and selling out the people of the United States? Right? You see the problem there? They thought that the redeeming virtue of having a king is the king would at least be loyal to the country, because the finances of the country were mixed with the finances of the king. But once you put the president on a salary and they're just having that fixed finite compensation, at that point they might start looking abroad and making deals with foreign kings and princes and governments and selling out the people of the country. So how to guarantee that they would maintain their fiduciary duty, their zealous affection and loyalty to the people? Well, here's the Foreign Emoluments Clause. No title of nobility shall be granted by the United States, and no person holding any office of profit or trust under the United States shall, without the consent of the Congress, accept of any present, emolument, office, or title of any kind whatever from any king, prince, or foreign state. The language of it is categorical, sweeping, absolute, unqualified. They did not want presidents or members of Congress or appointed officials, anybody occupying any office of profit or trust under the United States, collecting money from the foreign monarchies or the foreign governments. Okay, now, for more than 2 centuries, we basically have not had a problem with the Foreign Emoluments Clause. Think of it like almost like a wall of separation, like the wall of separation we've talked about in terms of the Establishment Clause between church and state. This is a wall of separation between the personal finances of the President of the United States and other federal officials and foreign government money. You just can't touch it. And it is the fear of contamination of American domestic politics and government by foreign influence and foreign subversion that required this wall to be built in the Foreign Emoluments Clause. And so for more than 2 centuries, every president has not gone anywhere near trespassing on that line between personal finances and foreign government money. Some presidents have even steered so far away from it when there's not been a potential violation of the letter of the Foreign Emoluments Clause, but the potential violation of the spirit of it, they've even steered away. President Kennedy famously was offered Irish citizenship because the people of Ireland loved him so much, and he declined it because he thought that this could offend the spirit of the Foreign Emoluments Clause. You'll remember that President Obama won the Nobel Peace Prize. And although there was a ruling by his Ethics Council, and I believe by the Department of Justice, that he could accept the money. It was more than $1 million because it was not actually being offered by the Swedish government, but by an independent private foundation which runs the Nobel Prizes. Obama still felt that it was too close to accepting a foreign government emolument. Although he accepted the award, he did not accept any of the money, and it was given away immediately to charity, and he thought that that was the best way of dealing with the problem. But in the course of our history, there are presidents who've been given small tokens or gifts who have always reported it to Congress and asked whether or not they could keep it. I'll give you an example from our great 16th president, Abraham Lincoln, who was given, in the middle of the Civil War, in 1862, beautiful elephant tusks by the King of Siam. And Honest Abe wanted to keep them, and so he petitioned Congress. He said he'd like to keep these elephant tusks, and Congress basically said, "You're doing a great job in the Civil War, President Lincoln, but no, you can't keep them. Please turn them over to the Department of State, I believe." And so he did. So basically what we have is a fastidious attention to the Foreign Government Emoluments Clause. Nobody has come close to violating it until we reached the last president, Donald Trump. Now, when Donald Trump was sworn into office in January of 2017, there was tremendous conversation, controversy, consternation among the ethics scholars. He had more than 500 different businesses all over the world in hotel, hospitality, golf courses, different kinds of trademark businesses and so on. And the ethics advisors were telling him that he could not accept any money from foreign governments in this process. And the smart thing to do would be to divest himself completely, sell his interests in any of the businesses at all, if there was an intention to keep doing commerce with foreign governments. But Trump basically did the reverse. He said he was going to keep all of his businesses going. He would not divest from any of them. He would not even place them in a blind trust. And they began aggressively courting foreign government business for the hotels and the golf courses and the various hospitality enterprises. In other words, he expanded his interaction with them, and his only concessions were to say he would put his 2 adult sons in day-to-day charge of the businesses, day-to-day charge, suggesting that not only would Trump continue to derive the value and the benefit and own these businesses, but he would be overseeing it. And of course, he continued to do that and continued to aggressively hustle business and promote his great hotels, the greatest hotels in the world, and his golf courses, the greatest golf courses in the world, and so on. Okay, so that set him up for a very serious problem, which is a head-on collision with the Foreign Government Emoluments Clause. There's a separate problem that I at least want to invoke here, which was he also had various federal government agencies like the Secret Service and the Commerce Department and the Department of Defense patronizing his hotels and golf courses and businesses and paying them for various stays and various kinds of events. That obviously collides with the Domestic Emoluments Clause. But that's a separate problem. In some sense, it's worse because there's not even the possibility under the Domestic Emoluments Clause of getting congressional permission and authorization for doing it. At least under the Foreign Emoluments Clause, there is this possible way of cleansing and rehabilitating these deals. But on the foreign emoluments side, Donald Trump never once came to Congress and asked for permission. Now, I'm not going to have time to go into all of it, but I will recommend to you very highly the staff report that was prepared in the Committee on Oversight and Accountability, where I'm the ranking member, called White House for Sale: How Princes, Prime Ministers, and Premiers Paid Off President Trump. And what we found was that Donald Trump had collected nearly $8 million in documented and documentable payments from foreign governments, the leading governments being China and Saudi Arabia, but we found dozens of cases of governments spending hundreds of thousands of dollars at various hotels, in some cases without even staying at the hotel, just basically depositing the money. And all of that was a dramatic increase over what had taken place before. And of course, Trump purchased the Trump International Hotel in Washington shortly before becoming president and violated there not just the Foreign Emoluments Clause with all the money coming in from foreign governments, but also the lease that was written, which said that no government official could collect any benefit or revenue from the lease of the old post office building, which became the Trump International Hotel in Washington, which I call the Washington emolument, because its principal function was to collect emoluments and payments from these foreign governments. All right, so you have the general picture there. Now, in defense of everything that happened, the position taken by the Trump family in those cases and the position taken by the Trump family after the release of the Democrats' Oversight Committee report was simple. And there were two basic claims, and these are the ones that I want to address today. And one is that, well, it's not a problem for the president to collect money from kings, princes, and foreign states, so long as the president is not taking his presidential salary, and then as long as the president decides to surrender the profits to the government of his commercial transactions with kings, princes, and foreign states. Start with this. There's nothing in the Foreign Government Emoluments Clause which says that it's okay to accept presents and emoluments, payments of any kind from a king, prince, or foreign state, as long as the president gives up his salary. So it departs dramatically from the text of the Constitution, which is absolute and all-encompassing and inclusive. It doesn't say anything about it. So they're just finger painting on the Constitution at that point. They're deciding to add a little PS, a little asterisk. Oh, but none of this applies if you give up your presidential salary. And if you look at the Domestic Emoluments Clause, we can see how wrong this principle is, because the design of the constitutional framers was that your presidential salary is the only thing you're allowed to accept. It's not as if the framers thought it would be just peachy keen for you to give up your salary from the American people as long as you, or in return for going out and collecting your money from the Prince of Saudi Arabia, or the communist bureaucrats in China, or some other king or queen. That cuts completely against the constitutional design. The framers wanted for there to be an exclusive fiduciary obligation to the people of America, not to the people of another country, not to foreign spies, which were crawling at the time of the American Revolution. Lots of governments were trying to get their claws into the new American government. So the framers understood that. But they wanted a president who was going to exhibit nothing but absolute and exclusive fiduciary loyalty to the people of the country. So it cuts against the core meaning of both the foreign and the domestic emoluments clauses to say, if you give up your financial nexus and relationship to the American people, oh, well, then it's just fine to go on some other government's payroll. That's absurd. It is ridiculous. Only Donald Trump and his family could come up with an argument that ridiculous.
But I give away my presidential salary. They say that no other president has done it. I'm surprised, to be honest with you. They actually say that George Washington may have been the only other president to do. But see whether or not Obama gave up his salary. See whether or not all of the other of your favorites give up their salary. The answer is no.
Well, what about the other argument? This one seems to have more surface plausibility, right? They're saying it's okay not to go to Congress to ask for its consent. It's okay to pocket all of this money from China and Saudi Arabia and Indonesia and Egypt and India and so on, so long as the president returns the profits to the U.S. government. Well, what's wrong with that? Well, let's start with this. Article 1, Section 9, Clause 8 doesn't say shall not accept the profits from any payment or present. It says it shall not accept any present or emolument, payment of any kind, whatever, which is very categorical, strong language in the Constitution. How do you get from that to the claim that, well, it's okay if I pocket $1 million or $1 billion from Saudi Arabia as long as I return to you the profits, however I define those, right? If you're running a hotel or a golf course or a restaurant or whatever, you already have to be spending money for the basic costs of running it, people's salaries and upkeep of the greens and so on. So in some sense, all of the money that comes in is going to be profit, is going to be gravy to you. In any event, that's not what the Constitution says. And I will go even further, because what Donald Trump was doing was saying, I'm going to invent this new rule, this exception to Article 1, Section 9, Clause 8, and I am going to implement it myself. I will judge for myself what is profit. And you can imagine how Donald Trump calculates what the profit is in that case. And then, having judged it for myself, I will just freely decide to write a check of some amount and then call it even. That's not what the Constitution says. That's never the way it's been interpreted by anybody. And so it just cracks me up that I've got colleagues who, when we start talking about the Foreign Emoluments Clause, will immediately go to saying, well, Donald Trump, he's written several checks to the Treasury returning the profits. That just gives the game away. That just shows he's accepting millions and millions of dollars that he can't be accepting and then taking some percentage of it. Knowing Donald Trump, I would guess it's probably in the 1% to 2% range. But even if it were in the 5 or 6% range, where does that come from? Where does that doctrine derive from? Did the stork bring it? Because it's not in the Constitution. It's not in the precedent or the history, the structure of the Constitution, and it doesn't make any sense. It completely violates common sense. So I hope that we've succeeded in exploding this fallacy that it's totally okay for Donald Trump to be taking millions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars for that matter from foreign governments, from foreign taxpayers, from foreign tyrants, kings, princes, just so long as he doesn't take money from the American people and just so long as he decides to voluntarily write occasional checks and call those the profits from the payments he's illegally pocketing. That's what you need to know about this fallacy, and that's what you need to know about the Emoluments Clause.
All right, so I have questions for you, but first, we're doing this series, just so that viewers know, we're doing this series to benefit an amazing organization called Democracy Summer. Congressman, what is Democracy Summer, and how can our viewers participate in it or support it?
Well, Democracy Summer is now nationwide. We are going to be in at least 43 or 44 states. I hope we can get to all 50 states. We organize it around members of the House or senators who want their interns and their young people working in their campaigns in the summer to participate in this nationwide program where we do seminars in the morning with historians, political scientists, political activists, elected officials, to talk about the history of the struggle for democracy and voting rights in America, and then talk about the struggles that are taking place today against the gerrymandering of our federal and state districts, against voter suppression tactics, against the filibuster, against manipulation of the Electoral College, against political violence by MAGA. So basically, it situates where we are today in the whole history of the struggle for strong democracy and voting rights in America. And the young people who we've recruited to our campaigns get to participate in both this academic component and in the essential political component of going out, knocking on doors, engaging in canvassing, voter registration, and all of the political projects we need. So in my case, Democracy Summer is my entire campaign. I'm not spending any money on TV, on radio, on pollsters, on consultants, any of that stuff for propaganda. We put it into education. And, to my mind, Brian, politics at its best is just about education. Educating people about our Constitution, about the rule of law, about our history, and educating people about the issues and what we need to do in order to address them and solve them today.
Well, excellent. We'll put the link to Democracy Summer right here on the screen. So if you want to support Jamie Raskin and his operation, please make sure to follow that link. Okay, so let's get into the emoluments clause here. We see this clause, again, located in the Constitution. How is there no enforcement mechanism for a provision that is found, again, in the Constitution, in the law of the land?
Well, if you go back and you read the Federalist Papers, there is definitely mention of impeachment being the enforcement mechanism if anybody were to engage in the outrageous, egregious violation of basic precepts of the Constitution in this way. Check out Federalist number 65. You will see people talking about it. Edmund Randolph from Virginia, who was a delegate to the Constitutional Convention, raised impeachment as a corrective to presidents who would be so lawless as to go on the payroll of foreign governments. We need a legislative machinery under the Emoluments Clause. It's sad to say because, again, from Lincoln to Obama, and everybody in between, whenever somebody has been given a pair of cufflinks or, some kind of trinket from a foreign government, they've reported it and they've turned it over. Yeah. It's not been a problem. Not until we got into Donald Trump. And now we're talking about a guy who says, no, I don't want money from the American people. I'll be plundering millions of dollars through association with foreign governments. By the way, in the report done by the Oversight Committee Democrats, we were only able to look at 4 of Donald Trump's more than 500 businesses. So the nearly $8 million we found was for just 4 businesses, and it was just for 20 countries. And we know that there were somewhere over 100 countries where business potentially was being done in terms of hotels, golf courses, and other kinds of business deals. So even the nearly 8 million we found just scratches the surface. And we engaged in the rather charitable assumption here that we were just going to look at the 4 years of Trump's term and not look at, for example, the $2 billion plus payment that Jared Kushner brought back after his time served as a Middle East envoy, where he basically was able to curry favor with Saudi Arabia and give them whatever they wanted, including a total cover-up of the assassination of Jamal Khashoggi, the Washington Post freelance journalist from Saudi Arabia who was drawn and quartered and assassinated by the homicidal Crown Prince's Secret Service and security team. So we didn't even, we didn't even get into that, and we didn't even look at anybody in the family like Jared Kushner, except for the president himself. Although clearly Jared Kushner is somebody who is occupying an office of profit or trust. So the Democrats have put forward legislation to create a legislative machinery under the Emoluments Clause in order to enforce it, with real criminal and civil penalties for presidents who pocket money, whether they describe it as a gift or a commercial purchase or a commercial contract from kings, princes, and foreign states without going to Congress first to obtain the consent of Congress. If you really think it's okay, then go to Congress and explain why it's okay. You really think it's all right, and you think it's okay to keep 90% of it or 95% of it, and then return 5% to the government in what you determine are profits, come to Congress and explain. And if you don't do that, then you can be civilly and criminally prosecuted for it, and there will be consequences.
And the irony of this is I presume that Republicans won't vote for this in deference to Trump, and yet at the same time, they're running these sham investigations about Joe and Hunter Biden doing what they say this legislation would actually fix. And so that's the whole irony of all of this, is that in their interminable effort to protect Donald Trump and his pilfering of foreign governments to take these emoluments, that the thing that they're trying to prosecute Joe Biden for without any evidence, this would actually fix that.
No, you got it, Brian. And in fact, these two approaches are going to collide over the next few weeks in Congress, because the Republicans are now saying that, well, they have obviously given up on impeachment. They don't have the votes because they don't have the evidence. And then they were talking about, maybe they would try to run some contempt motions against some people, including Attorney General Garland. Maybe that still happens. But they're floundering around looking for something to do. And what they seem to have settled on now is a reporting bill, which would say that a president must report the last 2 years of business activity of his or her own businesses and his or her immediate family members. Okay, several problems with this. Number one, it doesn't apply to candidates. I mean, the only thing it would really be useful for is if we could look at candidates, what their business activities have done. But of course, they don't want it to apply to Donald Trump now.
Right.
And at this point, he's a former president. So it wouldn't apply to him until he got in, God forbid. And of course, at that point, he would completely disobey it, and the Republicans would never do anything to make him do it. In any event, all of it is just a reporting bill. It doesn't put any muscle behind the Emoluments Clause, which is what we need now, because Donald Trump has laid down the gauntlet and showed that the Putin-Orban-Xi model of being a chief of state has now come to the United States. You can go in with money-making purposes. You can convert the presidency of the United States into an instrument of self-enrichment and private profit. And we've got to turn that around immediately. We've got to rebuild the little wall of separation that the founders created between the personal finances of a president and foreign government money. And so that's what we're trying to do by saying, you must come to Congress immediately when you receive anything from a foreign government. You have to come within 48 or 72 hours. And if you don't, you just hang on to it, you keep it, then you are subject to criminal prosecution. And you will be subject to civil lawsuit for us to take your ill-gotten gains away from you. And not only can the Attorney General of the United States bring such a suit, we've put in a qui tam action, which means that any citizen could be a crusader for the public interest and say, the president has pocketed this money from a foreign monarch or a government, and I'm going to get it back for the people of the United States. And then you get some small percentage of that for doing the people's work. So we're trying to put real teeth behind the Emoluments Clause, because otherwise, like what they've done with Section 3 of the 14th Amendment we talked about before, Brian, which says that nobody who swears to support the Constitution, who violates the Constitution by engaging in insurrection, shall ever be allowed to hold federal or state office again. They want to turn this into a dead letter. They want to make the emoluments clause completely meaningless and just blink it away. And we can't have that. And so that's why, not just for Donald Trump, but for any president in the future, for Democrat, Republican, Independent, whatever, we need to make clear you can't violate the foreign emoluments clause. You can't pocket money from foreign states, at least without going to Congress and explaining why you're doing it and giving Congress the chance to say no.
Trump now has his public stock that at some point he'll be able to draw money from and borrow against. So to what extent does Trump media, that stock, acting as basically a laundromat to wash foreign money, worry you?
It worries me a lot. Again, I have colleagues like Mr. Donalds, I think you quoted the little colloquy between us in our committee, who say that, there's no problem if China or Saudi Arabia decides to take out $1 million worth of rooms at the Trump Hotel, at the Washington Emolument. No problem, because that's a real business. The Constitution doesn't say that. It doesn't say the president can set up a business and then start laundering money in from foreign governments. And they say, that wouldn't be fair to the president if he couldn't take money from foreign governments. Wait a second, okay? This is the United States of America. It is a democracy. There's a lot of ways to go out and make money. You can go do that if you want to. If you want to be president of the United States, you can't do business with foreign governments. Whether it's through a hotel, a diamond industry, a restaurant, a bank, whatever it is. No, you can't set all those things up and put up a for sale sign for the White House.
Why do you think Republicans haven't adhered to their traditional branding related to caring about national security, given how blatant, emoluments could be in terms of causing a president to act in the benefit of another country?
Well, because they've got a slogan, which is America first. Of course, Donald Trump puts America last every single time. When they make all these dirty deals with Saudi Arabia, with China, with President Xi, who Donald Trump sang the praises of dozens of times during COVID-19, defending everything they did. Now, he wants to blame it all on President Xi and not on his own recklessness and negligence. But in any event, that whole America First thing is just a joke coming from the Republicans, because Donald Trump is in the business of making as much money as he can with foreign tyrants and monarchs and dictators and kings. That is his business model. And he wants to do it, obviously, with Putin, too. He wanted to create a big hotel in Moscow. He loves nothing more than doing dirty deals with foreign governments.
Has anything been done to prevent the abuses that Trump committed as president in the event that he becomes president again? I know that we right now are waiting on legislation that may or may not pass that would prevent, emoluments from being taken. But is there any other safeguards that have been put in place as the result of his presidency that could at least differ from the first one, barring this legislation being passed?
Alas, no. And I think that our experience with the emoluments clause has taught Trump and other plundering would-be dictators and autocrats the exact wrong lesson, which is you can get away with it. Because the lawsuits that were brought, for example, by the state of Maryland and the District of Columbia and by hotels that were competitor hotels were thrown out on the grounds of standing, that there was not an individualized injury in fact that would give rise to their ability to sue in court. And the courts repeatedly pointed out, it's up to Congress to act. Congress has to act.
So basically, the courts don't have jurisdiction because there isn't one person who was injured, quote unquote, by what he's doing. And so any violation to the Constitution has to be remedied by legislation in Congress?
Essentially, that's right.
Okay.
And what that means is that Congress needs to put into place an entire legislative machinery that will control a runaway president.
And so why can't we just name it the Hunter Biden, bill to protect against taking in foreign money and like make sure that it applies to everything that would apply to Donald Trump, but just name it for Hunter Biden and then have all these Republicans vote against that?
Yeah, well, Hunter Biden, of course, never was on the payroll of a foreign government.
Of course, but it doesn't matter,
Well, we would be very happy to make a deal with the Republicans if they would take seriously the necessity of building a legislative structure to enforce the Emoluments Clause, but they're not interested in it. And, this is really what's at stake in this presidential election, Brian. I mean, we have two radically contrasting philosophies of what democratic government is for. I mean, our position in the Democratic Party is that the government has got to be an instrument for the common good of everybody, which is why we passed the Infrastructure Act. We made a $1.2 trillion investment in the roads, the highways, the bridges, the ports, the airports, rural broadband, green energy. We did that, right? That's going to benefit everybody in the country. Their vision is that the government is an instrument for private self-enrichment of the guy who gets in and his family and his close friends. And that's why we saw nothing but constant deals going on with Donald Trump and the hotels and the golf courses and promoting their businesses through the government and getting government agencies and departments to stay there. And it doesn't end with Saudi Arabia, as we saw. Even after the administration was over, the big payoff arrived, the $2 billion going directly to Jared Kushner. That's a completely different philosophy of what government is for. So we've got to take this beautiful 18th century principle that our framers embodied in the Constitution, and we've got to update it for the 21st century and the struggle we have today against the autocrats, the plutocrats, the kleptocrats, and the theocrats, all of whom are arrayed against American constitutional democracy.
Well, perfectly put. We'll leave it there. Congressman, what should we expect for the next episode of Class?
Next time, Brian, we are going to look at this fallacy, which is now pervasive across the land as it's being promoted by the forces of Christian white nationalism. And the fallacy is that America is a white Christian nation where the Bible is supreme and superior to the Constitution of the United States.
Excellent. And of course, to watch that episode, as well as the other episodes that we'll be doing with the rest of this series, please make sure to subscribe to this channel. The link to subscribe and the link to support Democracy Summer are right here on this screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Jamie Raskin.
This is Class with Jamie Raskin.